We are live.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us for another edition of the FITSNews Month in Review. If you are new to this format, it is live, so if we say something crazy and stupid, we're busted. There's not much we can do about it. So this is our third, I think, installment of this new feature. We've been doing it over the past couple months over the summer as we continue to try to offer new content offerings to our audience. I wanted to point out real quick, this is obviously, we're in August, it's August 2nd, but this is a month in review for July. And obviously it was an insane month last month. All the political stuff that happened, we've been covering that extensively on FITSNews. If you've watched our recent weeks in review, we've covered some of the political developments in our nation extensively. If you've come here for politics, though, you're going to be a bit disappointed. We're not going to dive into that this week. We are going to focus on several of the true crime sagas that we have been covering for months and in some cases years. We're going to dive into the Micah Miller story, which had some big developments just this week in Horry County. FITSNews team was there in Conway, South Carolina at the very cusp of those late breaking developments. So we're going to bring you all the details on that. We're also going to walk you through some information related to the investigation into the death of Stephen Smith, whether or not that case even ties to the infamous Murdaugh family and that Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. We're going to go through that. And also, there were some updates this week in the case involving Alec Murdoch, particularly a defeat for his team in the Court of Appeals. We're going to walk you through exactly what happened legally in the Murdaugh case and give you the very latest on that. But Jen, I want to bring you in here. First of all, we can't thank Jen Wood enough. Jen Wood not only researching, writing, but she has pulled all of this together today. Just an incredible feat. Jen, is there anything, first of all, Jen, is there anything you can't do?
Yeah, there's plenty. There are, and this has not been pulled off completely yet, so don't jinx me, please.
That's fair enough. We'll wait to compliment you till the end, right?
Yeah, Dylan is on vacation in Alaska, and yeah, I am producing for him, and thankfully he was available. I'm sure it was quite early this morning for a quick phone call on something, but we miss him a lot. He'll be back next week.
No doubt. Looking forward to getting Dylan back. And but it has been just an unbelievable week in this Micah Miller case. Jen, you and I went to Horry County, to Conway, South Carolina this week, expecting to cover a hearing in probate court, expecting to hear arguments over who should be named. Tell me the technical legal term.
A personal representative over Micah Miller's estate.
And it was Sierra Francis, Micah's sister, who was pushing for that designation. There were also reports that potential civil actions could be in the works from the Miller family. But when we walked into that courtroom, Jen, there was an eerie kind of vibe in that courtroom, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was, because we had been with Regina Ward and Abby Francis prior to, and, the vibe definitely was different when we walked into the courtroom.
Yeah, so we walk in, the attorneys are there. John Paul Miller comes in. Before court is called to order, however, there was a conference about 15 minutes long in the judge's chambers, the probate court judge's chambers there in Conway. When they came out, and when the hearing was gavelled to order, it was very quickly announced that a global settlement had been reached in this case. And for those of you, we've had a lot of folks ask us, what's the deal? What's the difference between a settlement and a global settlement? How does that work exactly? Well, a settlement is typically involving one particular case or potential case, and it usually involves one party and another party. A global settlement involves multiple cases or potential cases and multiple parties. So the settlement that was reached on Monday between the family of Micah Miller and John Paul Miller and his church, the Solid Rock at Market Common Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, was a global settlement involving all members of the Francis family, Micah Miller's family, John Paul Miller, and the church. So not only all parties, but Jen, also all potential actions. And I think, Jen, you've got a clip. Andy Fancher, our reporter, was with us in Myrtle Beach. He got great footage of everything that transpired. I think we've got a clip from the press conference. Is that correct? Is that what we're going to run with first?
Yep, we're going to start with that one. 1 second.
Let's see if we can't take a look at this clip from that press conference. This is one of the lawyers for John Paul Miller speaking about the settlement.
Today, John Paul Miller, Solid Rock Church, Inc., and the estate of Micah Francis Miller, along with individual members of the Francis family, have reached a full and final settlement on all presently filed litigation. The parties have also signed a full mutual release on all potential future litigation. The terms of the settlement agreement are sealed under a confidentiality agreement. The agreement and release include, but are not limited to, the dismissal with prejudice of the matters currently pending in both family court and probate court of Horry County. You just witnessed in court the withdrawal of the petition in probate court. Micah's family, Pastor Miller, and the church have set their differences aside to allow Micah's memory to live on without the encumbrance of contentious litigation. All parties now consider this matter closed. Those that have sought justice for Micah should feel accomplished in helping the Francis family in reaching this milestone. South Carolina criminal investigators have concluded their work of following up on the investigation done by Robeson County Sheriff's Office in this case, with nothing new to report.
All right, now that's an interesting point there, Jen. The claim there at the end by Attorney Long, that's Russell Long, that's one of John Paul Miller and Solid Rock's attorneys. He claimed that all of the criminal investigations into John Paul Miller were at an end. In fact, I specifically pressed him on this during the press conference. I asked him, hey, wait a minute, you didn't specify an agency. You very carefully did not mention federal investigations. So we pushed him on that a little bit, but he claimed that all these investigations are done.
Yeah, and I keep telling people to pay attention to how he phrased it, because he was very deliberate in his wording when he said that. And then, it implied that, we reached out and, asked if the investigations were still ongoing and did not receive a response. So we're assuming they're closed.
Yeah, that was sort of how he justified that statement. And again, we pushed him on it. And also we reached out to our sources in law enforcement. And folks, if you don't know, FITSNews has the best sources for local, state, federal law enforcement, prosecutorial agencies of any media outlet in South Carolina. We reached out to our network of sources. We ran those comments from John Paul Miller's attorney by them, and they refused to confirm them. And in fact, we're pretty clear that those statements were not accurate to their knowledge, Jen, which I think is very significant. But before we go into where this case is going, because this settlement upset a lot of people, let's just go ahead and let's talk about that part of this story. I mean, there were folks claiming the Francis family sold out, that they betrayed Micah's memory. I mean, there were some very harsh comments on social media. And Jen, I think you did a really good job. You did a report on FITSNews.com in the aftermath of this, talking about just what a difficult road laid ahead of them in the event they were going to try to seek any sort of civil remedies against John Paul Miller. Jen, walk us through not only how hard it would have been just to get standing, but after that to win some sort of a judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, when I researched it, it wasn't just a difficult road, it was a risky road. When you look at, when Mica died, she had filed for divorce. He had been served with divorce papers Thursday before she died on Saturday. But there had been no hearings. There had been no decisions made. So when she died, they were still married, making him her legal heir. Like, he would be the beneficiary of her estate. So the initial filing, when Sierra Francis filed initially, it was to become special administrator of her estate. And that is something that they wanted to do to ensure that Micah's phone and Apple Watch came back to them, because that, I think, is going to give them the most answers regarding her last day, her last moments. And that was agreed to, I believe it was in May. But then what they wanted to do was to put Sierra Francis as the personal representative of the estate, because they wanted to proceed with that divorce filing and separation of assets. So really, when you look at it, the probate court statute says that, if you are not legally divorced and you die without a will, as Micah did, your next of kin is still your spouse. And that, it is the statute. It is, law, and they could have fought that, but that is how South Carolina law is currently written. So that was going to be an uphill battle. And if they did file a civil lawsuit for wrongful death, or, there had been claims that she had been grossly underpaid working for the church, all of, any settlement or wins in a civil lawsuit would go back to John Paul Miller as the beneficiary of her estate. So it really was, they were in a really tight, tough position with a lot of difficult decisions to make. And to me, I don't think they really had a lot of choices, and they really weren't legally entitled to any settlement.
Right. And you could see just the looks on the faces of those family members before and after the announcement of the settlement, and particularly the press conference. And I want to shift now a little bit. We're going to come back to that Apple Watch and phone in just a minute.
Yeah,
Jen.
and I wanted to point out that the risky part of it, before we go on, but I wanted to point out that the risky part is that we have been hearing that there are likely some civil lawsuits that are going to be brought against John Paul Miller from additional victims potentially. So, in addition to, the uphill legal battle, they could have been vying for money from John Paul against other plaintiffs.
Other victims,
Yeah.
absolutely. No doubt. And again, you've reported on that. You reported on those imminent civil actions against John Paul, and that's not at all surprising based on the contents of some of the court filings that have dropped in the aftermath of Micah Miller's death, particularly the filing from John Paul Miller's first wife, Allie, that raised just a ton of new material, new allegations, just a really bombshell filing. Jen Wood, you again, first to report on that. But while we talk about this press conference, one of the comments that we kept getting, this was a joint press conference, one of Regina Ward. We mentioned we're going to get to her in just a second. We interviewed her this week, sat down with her extensively, but a lot of folks were upset about this statement that folks should stop protesting Solid Rock Church, because obviously the protests at this church have been a big part of this story. In fact, there have actually been criminal charges filed against one of the church members for spraying these protesters with a sprinkler. But I wanted to read this. Sierra Francis took to Facebook just last night. We're airing this on a Friday morning. She took to Facebook Thursday night and posted something that was appears to be on behalf of the family. It talks about she's with Michael Francis and several other members of the family, but she made something pretty clear. One thing circulating that we definitely want to make everyone aware of: Russell Long does not legally represent the Francis family. And she's referring to the attorney that we just watched who made these statements. We stand behind our legal representation, who was carefully selected and continues to do an amazing job helping us navigate this impossible situation. She also said, after court, there was a joint statement made. We did not know anyone's intended words until they were spoken. That said, we have not asked protesters to protest or to refrain from it. We encourage everyone to follow their convictions within the law. She also said that while we've reached a legally sealed settlement, quote, our journey is far from over.
It's funny because during the press conference, when Russell Long did say that, I was standing right next to Anna Francis, who I interviewed in June, and I heard her say, we did not say that. I mean, she was very upset, and like if you've been watching Micah's sisters, they are some strong women.
Yeah, it's a strong crew. That's a strong crew for sure. And getting to meet that family, just incredibly gracious folks after all they've been through. Can't imagine what it must be like. But we're going to talk in just a minute. We sat down with one of the members of the Francis family. But Jen, before we get to that, I wanted to ask you, we're going to start diving into this interview with Regina Ward. First of all, you've got a clip ready for us from that interview. Jen, walk us through this clip.
Yeah, so Regina Ward, you did a really great job on this interview, by the way. I just want to make sure I tell you that, because you did a great job. You were asking Regina about, Micah's last day. So do you want to go ahead and we'll take a listen to it? And because I thought she had some really interesting insights into her last day, and what she thinks happen potentially, and where she thinks the answers are going to be coming from.
Let me ask you this question. What do you think happened that day?
Well, of course, anything that I would think is speculation, and that is the $1 million question. I personally believe that answer to that, or some form of answer to that, will be on that cell phone or that Apple Watch that is in the possession of the legal authorities. And so we have a court order requiring those things to be released to my office, and they won't release it until they have finished their quote investigation, all legal authorities. And so I'm hoping that when I get my hands on those things, that may hold the answer. But I also, from a theoretic sort of a, stance, is that Mr. Miller was very consistent in his, contact with her. He's even made, comments in other news agencies and so forth that he sent her 6 or 7 emails. I haven't got my hands on those yet. He made comments that he sent emails to her on the same day that she died, and then realized that there were 2 that she probably didn't get.
So yeah, just some really, I do think in terms of, when Mica left her house, her apartment that day, she was dressed for work. She left with just enough time to get to her shift. And I've always said, something happened on her way to work that changed the trajectory of her day. And I think that answer to that, I think she's right, is going to be on her phone or her Apple Watch. And I think that is going to be, the best chance that the Francis family has of learning what happened that day. And the fact that they won that is huge. I think that's all they've ever wanted is answers.
Yeah, and that was one of the big questions as we reported on the global settlement and the aftermath of it. There was obviously, as we mentioned, a lot of negative reaction to that settlement from various corners. But one of the questions that we kept getting was, does the settlement in any way impact the ability of Regina Ward to receive that phone and that watch? I actually reached out to her this week and posed that question directly to her. She said, quote, "That does not change." In other words, she will still receive that information, and obviously that would be a big part of helping find answers to
Yeah, and
exactly.
they do have that court order, and she said, they keep submitting it to the Robeson County Sheriff's Department, who did the initial investigation, to make sure that it comes back to them, and they keep saying that the investigation is still ongoing and they can't provide it. So
Yeah, which absolutely refutes what John Paul Miller,
Russell Long said,
what
yeah.
his attorney said.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. One other thing that we wanted to clear up, there were some folks that watched that interview with Regina Ward. By the way, it's on FITSNews YouTube. You can probably scroll over and check it out now if you want. But one of the things in that interview that was mentioned, Attorney Ward made a comment about serving John Paul Miller, quote, "that day." And a lot of folks have been questioning whether or not that meant he was served on the day that Micah Miller died. And if so, how does that impact his alibi? And so I did reach out to Attorney Ward. We talked about this, and she did clarify that no, in fact, the day she was referring to was the day he was served on Thursday, 45 hours before Micah Miller died. In fact, we've got the certificate of the affidavit of the individual who served John Paul Miller with those papers that specifically says it happened at 5:38 p.m. on Thursday, the 25th of April, which would be 45 hours before the 911 call from Lumber River State Park. So that is something to point out. A lot of folks have raised some red flags about that. But Jim, we did another interview in Myrtle Beach this week, one that we didn't know we were going to have the opportunity to do. We went to Attorney Regina Ward's office thinking we were going to interview her and then head over to the courthouse, but we were surprised, pleasantly surprised, to have the opportunity to meet and to interview Abby Francis. And Abby is Micah's youngest sister. She had apparently done one interview on a format kind of like this, but had never done an in-person interview before. And obviously I was unaware I would get the chance to speak with her, so we were kind of scrambling at the last minute. But you've got a clip from that interview, Jen, don't you,
do.
with Abby Francis? Let's cut to that, because I thought this was, even with the lack of foreknowledge preparation, this was an incredibly poignant exchange. Let's listen.
I'm a why person. Why did you do that? What was your reasoning? What was your motive? What was your intent? And sometimes people just do things because they can. There is no reason, there is no motive, there is no intent. They can, so they do. And
on the one hand, there's your sister fighting to preserve the integrity of religion for those, even though she's clearly dealing with the
Right.
situation that's completely beyond the pale. But then the second after she dies, you've got him manipulating it. Doesn't piss you off?
I think there's a difference between worldly anger and righteous anger. Whenever you're righteously angry, God's got it. He'll figure it out. I have no ill intent for anything. And that's very hard for anybody to say and to truly mean. And again, I don't want to see him. I have no intent to see him. I have no reason to see him. The only reason I had to see him was for Mica, and she's gone.
I want to ask you.
Boy, just I had goosebumps just talking to Abby. I mean, it was
When she said that in the room, I had goosebumps and I got them again. I mean, she was incredibly poised, and I was so impressed by her. I was impressed by Anna when I talked to her as well. I think to me, both of them just seemed to be brokenhearted but trying to do the right thing in their sister's memory.
no doubt about it. And again, we weren't really prepared to sit down with her, but man, it ended up being
You did great.
It ended up being incredible, and certainly we're going to keep tabs on it. By the way, for those of you following this story, again, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of acrimony between John Paul Miller and the Francis family. John Paul Miller has made a number of representations about the Francis family. We have asked to sit down with him on several occasions now. In fact, we made another attempt to do so on our trip to the coast. And I just want everyone to know that, this microphone, just as it is open to Attorney Regina Ward, to any member of the Francis family, it is also open to John Paul Miller, and it is also open to any of his legal representatives who would like to sit down and talk. And if you could tell from those interviews, I'm kind of a bit of a softie in an interview. I try to let people talk. I don't ambush people. 9 times out of 10, I give them the questions ahead of time I want to ask. So I don't want to ambush anybody or catch anybody in a deer in the headlights moment. I don't think that serves the debate. My goal is to have somebody know what they're going to be asked, think about what they want to say, and explain their position. And so I would reiterate, Pastor Miller, once again, any member of our team is more than willing to sit down with you under those terms and conditions whenever you're ready to sit down with us and tell your side of the story and address some of these issues. And that offer stands. It will always stand, and it stands for anybody on any issue we cover. Jen, pivoting gears here, a lot of stuff happening this coming week. One of the cases that we've been following that has made its way onto our radar involves a circuit court case in Greenville, South Carolina. This is the South Carolina 13th Judicial Circuit, Greenville County, and it involves an individual whose name probably not widely known, but to our audience, particularly those who have followed the saga of Stephen Smith, it is one of the names that is most well known, and that is Patrick Wilson. This is a young man from Hampton County, South Carolina, who, along with another individual, has been listed as a person of interest in connection with the death of Stephen Smith, the 19-year-old from Hampton County, South Carolina, whose body was found, again, almost 9 years ago, over 9 years ago, on a road there in rural Hampton, South Carolina. This is just a an unsolved mystery, Jen. It has been for a long time, but Patrick Wilson will be appearing in court this coming week, Tuesday, August the 6th, 9:30 a.m. up in Greenville County. He is facing a third-degree assault and battery charge up in Greenville. And Jen, I believe you said he's also been charged. There's a couple other charges on his record. Walk us through these other charges.
There's also a pending charge for receiving stolen goods in Greenville. There was a show cause hearing on that on July 18th of this year, but that right now, that's the only hearing that's been scheduled. And then in Hampton County, there is a grand larceny case that is still pending from 2022.
All right, so this hearing that is taking place in Greenville, we've heard a lot of buzz about this hearing. We've had some sources indicate that Patrick Wilson may be close to talking. We don't know anything beyond that. It's very, the buzz is sort of, very non-specific as it relates to this case. But we have heard some reports on that. And obviously, Patrick Wilson, one of two persons of interest in connection with the Stephen Smith murder. I guess everyone's calling it a murder. I mean, until we know differently. I mean, that seems like what to call it. That's what SLED has called it, the agency investigating it. The other is a young man by the name of Sean Connolly, also from Hampton. I think these two are both from Brunson, South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. But as this Patrick Wilson hearing came to the radar, and as we started focusing on this recent push to blame Stephen Smith's death, or reblame it rather, on a member of the Murdaugh family, we recalled an interview that I gave, or that I conducted last year with an investigator by the name of Steve Peterson. Now, Steve Peterson was following the Murdaugh theory. He was also following the theory that it was not Murdaugh's. He called one theory A and theory B. And in my interview, he stated explicitly that SLED had informed him that neither Buster nor Paul Murdaugh were even in Hampton County at the time Stephen Smith died. And obviously that was a major development, but it was what Investigator Peterson said next that really caught my attention. And Jen, I think you've got a clip pulled from that interview where he talks about confronting Sean Connolly in connection with the death of Stephen Smith. Let's, you got that clip for us, Jen?
Yep.
Just an unbelievable exchange here, folks, if you hadn't seen it.
One day I just show up at his house. I told you I didn't want to talk to you. Yeah, but I thought maybe you decided you changed your mind. I just didn't get that call. I'm not a cop anymore. I don't have to do things by the book as much as I did back in the day. So yes, I ignored that. And by now, Sandy and Andy are parting ways. Mm-hmm. And Sandy's not taking the advice that Andy is giving. They're having disagreements. That's between them. I don't get involved in that, but they end up parting ways. So I talked to one of the guys there, and he is adamant. I mean, he is aggressively trying to repel my question. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's not. And I'm thinking, listen, dude, that was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. If you're not involved in anything, why are you so upset about stuff? Mm-hmm. If you had nothing to do with it, who cares? Mm-hmm. Just tell me that. Let's talk about this. No, and he's screaming, I'm going to let my dog out on you. He's got this big dog he's got in this little trailer barking. I was like, well, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. And so we go back and forth and back and forth. And I'm going to call the sheriff and get you arrested. You're trespassing on my property. Get off, get off, get off. And I said, okay, all right, I'm leaving. I said, but I've seen pictures of your truck that were taken the day after Stephen's accident. And I've seen the damage. Now, that's a total lie.
I'll just say that sounds like a bluff.
No, it totally was. Totally was.
I haven't seen those pictures.
He goes off. Mm-hmm. He goes absolutely off. I told the police that was a deer I hit that day. And I was like, you told what police? Ooh. Who did you tell? I don't remember. Highway Patrol, Hampton County. Let's narrow it down to that. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't want to talk to you. Get out. And he stops. I'm afraid he's going to become violent at this point. So I do leave. I take some pictures of his car, but it's not the same car he had back then. Right. So
And this is obviously Sean Connell.
Yeah, well, this is one of the people that were mentioned in your book.
Fair enough.
Well, of course, I call
We'll go with
SLED
that.
as I'm driving away. And I'm like, son of a bitch. I said, this SOB's done it. This guy's done it.
Really?
This is the driver. This is the guy that killed Stephen. I said,
Wow. I tell you what, Jen, every time I watch that, it just, because I think this is the guy that's gotten closer to anybody to
I do
cracking
too.
this
And
case.
I mean, he's received a lot of pushback, and I think he's gotten the closest. I agree with you.
Well, we're going to continue to track this case. One of the things that we did in the aftermath of the double homicide trial of Alec Murdoch, we started simply releasing all of our Stephen Smith files. Now, obviously, we have not released the graphic crime scene images. Don't know what the restrictions are on those, but that's not the kind of thing that we would put out there, similar to the sealed murder scene files in the Murdaugh murders case, the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdoch. We had all that material, did not release it. That is obviously sealed material, but other than that, we've released pretty much everything. We've released the initial report. We've released interview recordings. We've released just a ton of information related to this case. And Jen, also this last week, earlier this month, there were reports that came out again trying to pin this on the late Paul Murdaugh after attempts previously to pin it on Buster Murdaugh. And as you heard earlier, we talked about how they were nowhere to be seen in Hampton County at the time of Stephen Smith's death. But just to follow up, as we do, we reached out to our network of law enforcement sources, and again, they told us, quote, zero credibility to those reports. Now, again, I want to be very clear here. There was reason to speculate about the Murdaugh family's involvement in Stephen Smith's death, because their family name was all over the initial investigatory report. So that speculation, the initial speculation anyway, was not ill-founded. And that's going to be something Buster Murdaugh's going to have to deal with as he pursues a phalanx of lawsuits. Obviously, he hadn't sued us. He sued a bunch of other folks, but he will have to deal with that the family name was in the report. But at some point, people need to start looking at where this case is going and where the investigators are going. And it is clearly moved away from any member of the Murdaugh family being directly involved in the death of Stephen Smith, and has remained on those persons of interest. In fact, some law enforcement sources have referred to them as prime suspects. So again, this is not a team sport. No one should be rooting for one person or another person to be guilty of the crime. That's not what any of this is about. And if anybody is approaching it from that angle, shame on them. This is about finding the truth wherever it may lie. That is what this media outlet has done from the beginning of the story. That's what we're going to continue to do, and that's why this discussion is important. And by the way, we will be following that hearing on Tuesday morning in Greenville County, South Carolina, as one of the persons of interest in the Stephen Smith investigation is scheduled to appear in court on related or unrelated charges, rather. Jen, Murdaugh news. We did have some Murdaugh news this week, didn't we?
We sure did.
We talked about it in the lead. This was an interesting situation because I think I did a social video talking about how every Murdaugh court ruling is like a pretzel. You got to kind of figure out, okay, which
Like, does this mean something? Yeah, when we first got it, I was like, I'm struggling to even wrap my head around this.
Yeah, it was an interesting order. It came from the South Carolina Court of Appeals. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is a 9-member court. It is the second highest court in South Carolina, just below the 5-person Supreme Court. And what the order stated, it was essentially rejecting a motion from Alec Murdoch's attorneys to hold his appeal in abeyance or to suspend it while the Supreme Court decided whether or not to give Alec Murdoch a new trial, or more specifically, whether or not to hear his appeal of a recent ruling not to give him a new trial. Basically, what the appeals court told Alec Murdoch's lawyers is, you're going to have to brief on the schedule we've outlined. We're not going to hold things up while you wait to see if the Supreme Court takes the case. Now, a lot of folks have taken that ruling to mean that the Supreme Court is not going to hear Alec Murdoch's appeal directly, or his appeal of the motion denying him a new trial. We have not heard that. Also, one thing I want to point out, Jen, it's very interesting. As this ruling was being issued from the Court of Appeals, major changes were taking place on the Supreme Court. Literally at the moment it was released, a new Chief Justice was taking office, taking control of the entire judicial branch. For those of you who follow South Carolina, you probably know this already, but the Chief Justice is more than just one of 5 votes on that high court. He is also the chief executive of the judicial branch, basically like the president of the judiciary. In fact, we saw that at work in the Murdaugh case when former Chief Justice Donald Beatty assigned both Clifton Newman to preside over the trial, and then later assigned former Chief Justice Jean Toll to preside over Murdaugh's bid for a new trial. So it's a very powerful position. Donald Beatty, his last day, July 31st, he was replaced by the new Chief Justice John Kittredge. And also, as Beatty rotated off the court, a new Associate Justice took office, Letitia Verdon from Greenville, South Carolina. So a lot of changes on the court as all of these decisions were being reached. Jen, we've been talking Murdaugh. We've been looking at this story. I wanted to get your thought on this. And also, you did a report, or was it you or was it Cal? You did a report on the resignations of 2.
That was me.
That was you. Yeah, that's right. We were cranking so much stuff out. I can't barely remember. But you did a report on the resignations of 2 of the top agents who investigated the Alec Murdoch case. Jen, let me ask you this. As we look at, we got books coming out. This is Valerie Borline's new book. It's coming out soon. We're going to sit down with her later this month. As this book gets released, we've got a book coming out from the egg juror. Another juror apparently has written a book. We've got Becky Hill's former co-author, the disgraced former clerk of Colleton County Court. Her co-author says he's coming out with some new stuff. I mean, Jen, where does the Murdaugh mess stand right now? What is and what should folks who are following this saga be paying the closest attention to?
I think really the appeal for a new trial is a big thing. And also in federal court, they are going to hear oral arguments on the appeal of his sentence late October, early November in Virginia. So I think those are the 2 things really to keep the closest eye on. That bid for a new trial, it's not over. It's not going to be decided if he's going to get a new trial anytime soon. But those are the things that everybody's still watching.
Yeah, I mean, this story just, and a lot of folks have talked about the Micah Miller saga is starting to approach the Murdaugh saga. I don't think we're there yet, but one of the things is we talk about these investigators stepping down. That's going to segue nicely into our segment here with Andy Fancher. By the way, Andy was with us on our trip to Horry County. He also accompanied you, Jen, down to Hampton County, South Carolina, just doing some amazing work on all the stuff, those press conferences you watched, the interviews you watched, Andy, the brains behind all of those. But we're going to talk now. Anthony is, in addition to his breaking news reporting and a lot of the other in-depth investigative stuff he's done, Andy has developed a reputation.
A series of sorts.
Oh, yeah. It's, focusing on law enforcement behaving badly. We've called it Badges Gone Bad. And Andy, before you get into some of the cases you're going to talk about, I just got to talk briefly about this case out of Hampton, South Carolina. A police chief of Hampton, South Carolina, who was arrested just yesterday, in August the 1st is when he was arrested, for 3rd-degree assault. But the nature of the assault, alleged assault, it's still an allegation, involved a chainsaw and a deer stand, if I'm not mistaken. What in the world, guys?
Well, we don't know what the fella up in the deer stand did to deserve the police chief taking to the tree that the deer stand was mounted to. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions there. But that was most certainly an entertaining one. I don't know if we explicitly labeled that a badge gone bad, but I'd certainly consider it as such. In addition to the proliferation of officers and deputies that we've been reporting on since kickstarting this series about, what, a couple months ago? I mean, we didn't first start using that hashtag until the summer. And
It's
already
exploded.
it is just badge after badge after badge after badge gone bad.
Well, walk us through some of the ones you've been covering over the past couple weeks, Andy, as we look back on this summer of bad behavior from law enforcement.
Sure, and I suppose what's germane to the conversation y'all were just having relating to SLED is the termination of one SLED officer, and I've brought exhibits with me. For those who follow the month in review, we've had some issues with the printer, but by God's grace, we're there now, and I've brought with me some exhibits, which reminds me we're going to need to get color ink on the printer. This
One thing at a time, Andy. One thing at a
one
time.
thing at a time. I know. So this here is SLED former Lieutenant Mark Berube, dressed appropriately as an inmate of apparent Cholo descent in October of 2023. Now, this fella worked 15 years as an investigator with the Gang Intelligence Unit over for the state. Yet, in May of 2024, he turned his Halloween costume into a reality when he failed a field sobriety test after being pulled over by an officer of the South Carolina State Transport Police for speeding in Lexington County. He thereupon admitted to multiple firearms in his government vehicle that he was operating at that time, and was terminated before he was even booked into the Lexington County Detention Center. Now, according to SLED, this is the first agent termination following an arrest since January of 2020. Now, DUI is quite honestly irrelevant compared to the other officers we've been reporting on, but this badge is certainly one of the heavier ones, considering that, again, according to SLED, we have not seen a termination like this since 2020. Now, we did not find out about Mr. Berube's arrest until July of this year. Understand, he was arrested in May, and it took a few messages to SLED to confirm that this did in fact happen. Now, we confirmed that around the same time as something very interesting was happening in God's County, Spartanburg County, South Carolina. Now, I want to emphasize that the badges, plural, that have since gone bad in Spartanburg County, I thought Lawrence County was bad. Now, to emphasize the issue we're dealing with in Spartanburg County, I do want to start in Lawrence just briefly with my exhibits. This is Sheriff Don Reynolds of Lawrence County, who was actually arrested for threatening to kill his ex-wife with a revolver in November of 1985. He was charged with domestic violence. And this is Deputy Jonathan Devin Holliday, a Citadel military graduate of 2020 and a 2021 hiree of the Lawrence County Sheriff's Office. This is also Jonathan Devin Holliday in a booking photo in April of 2023 after he was arrested for threatening to, quote, effing kill his fiancée, now wife, with a firearm purportedly in play, according to the officers that responded to that scene. Yet despite that, this fella, 8th Circuit Solicitor David Stumbo, saw to it that the DV charges against Holliday were dropped. He submitted this into writing, and within 10 days, the deputy's charges were dropped, expunged, and he remains a deputy still. Now, why do I bring all this up? Because it's not half as bad as the purported negligence and malfeasance in Spartanburg County.
Ooh.
This Sheriff, Lord and Savior, Chuck Wright, fell in hot water on July 1st of this year when he took to Facebook and encouraged his followers to welcome a newly deputized deputy, Andy Wright. Now, if you notice, there is some similarities between the last names. This is Chuck Wright's second-born son. Now, he posted this photo to Facebook, and you'd think that perhaps some safeguards were put in place to ensure that he did not break an ethics violation. The South Carolina Ethics Reform Act that strictly prohibits government officials from abusing their office to advance the careers of a family member. Now, the Facebook comments under this post that does remain up has just been egregious. We were the first outlet to report that it appears as though Chuck Wright may have failed the SMART test on this one. Now, we did cite comments from the Ethics Commission themselves that despite Chuck Wright's allegation, his purported reaching out to the Ethics Commission to confirm this wasn't a violation, the Ethics Commission has since confirmed to us that he did not reach out and that he is not exempt from the Ethics Reform Act of 1991. And after we exclusively reported on this issue and as well took a deep dive into this guy's questionable career as a law enforcement officer that includes the death of a canine, the termination at Duncan PD, serious breach of department policy at Duncan PD, while all the while keeping his certification up to date while not being affiliated with an agency, which is an issue within itself as to how he had that Acadius login to keep his LEO certification up to speed. Nonetheless, please welcome our newest deputy. So, we have since made contact with a government watchdog out that way, Kyle Jocelyn, who has, I mean, talk about scorched earth policy with this guy. His FOIAs and his documentation, what he has received, is second to none. He was the fella who proved that Andy Wright was terminated from Duncan PD approximately 1 year ago. And let's see, I've got so many places here. Yeah, he provided a great series of information to us, and he was the one who reported to the Ethics Commission that, hey guys, y'all might need to take a look at the smoke over here. And it was the Ethics Commission that submitted into writing to him that he did provide enough evidence for an investigation into Chuck Wright. When we confirmed exclusively that there was an investigation into Chuck Wright, that Facebook post, I have never seen a Facebook post perform better than that one. Nearly 500 shares on that Facebook post, and nobody saying anything nice about Chucky Wright. Now, I emphasized Lauren's previously because the tips that have been coming in, steady flow of tips coming in, relating to a myriad of allegations that, quite frankly, we haven't substantiated yet, are just absurd. It is reprehensible that a law enforcement agency could even allow these allegations to prevail. We reached out to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office multiple times, to a public information officer whose job is to handle inquiries from outlets like us, from people like us. And what did they do? They turned their back on us, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Yeah. So this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg relating to badges gone bad. And this guy is certainly getting the clicks as we speak.
Well, Andy, Chuck Wright, obviously, for those of you who are longtime followers of FITSNews, we've been very diligent in exposing his abuse of civil asset forfeiture, which, of course, is when cops arrest you and take your stuff and don't give it back to you. Chuck Wright has been one of the arch offenders when it comes to abusing civil asset forfeiture in South Carolina. So he hasn't been a Fitz fan for a long time, but stay on him, Andy. You got another story, though, out of, I believe, out of Florence. Is that correct? Another badge gone bad in the PD?
Another badge gone bad. Yeah, in fact, on our editorial calls, because we have editorial calls for viewers, we discuss kind of the stories that we're working on every morning. And on Monday, I kind of just preface to the collective that, I'll be standing by for a badge gone bad, because at this point, it's inevitable. I mean, while you were on vacation, Will, we had a badge gone bad for every day of the week, including Sunday. So, yes, I will get to Florence. And I also want to preface before I get to Florence, just again, that proliferation of badges gone bad. Since we started this series over the summer, we've got domestic violence in Myrtle Beach, prostitution in Atlantic Beach. We've got explicit sexual harassment and intimidation in Sullivan's Island PD. We've got alleged adultery in Abbeville. We've got kidnapping and stalking in Somerville. And this little gal right here, forgetting her outfitted Glock 17 in a Quick Trip for an adolescent to find in Pickens. We've got 5 counts of domestic violence in Lexington. We've got threatening to incarcerate firefighters and the public in Cherokee. And we've got our latest badge gone bad there in Florence. This fella, Mr. Sellers, was placed on administrative leave over the summer after, according to Florence County deputies, he shot a fleeting suspect in his house 5 times. Now, in fact, you will reported on that officer-involved shooting, and I believe even then it didn't really pass the smell test to you. In your article, you were somewhat calling for the body-worn camera to this incident. Now, we have since learned that the fleeting suspect was a result of a misdemeanor traffic violation. Now, Florence County policy, use of force policy, expressly prohibits deadly use of force over something like driving under suspension. And what Deputy Sellers did here was he pursued this suspect into his home, unleashed his canine, which thereupon attacked the suspect's elderly father, not him, and while he was allegedly unarmed and retreating to a fetal position, he's shot 5 times. Now, to Sheriff T.J. Joy's credit, he did request a SLED investigation, as is standard operating procedure across the state when it comes to officer-involved shootings, OISs. He's placed on administrative leave within the day. 2 months later, he succumbs to a second SLED investigation, Deputy Sellers does. He's at his residence, also in the upstate, not in Florence, when, according to probable cause affidavits, he climbs onto his wife's car and attempts to assault her through the window. All the while, we've got sheriff's deputies standing by, purportedly watching this go down, imploring him to, hey, maybe stop attempting to assault your wife. He climbs off the car, or rolls off the car. He gets off the car and proceeds to berate the onlookers. Now, that sheriff's office refers that incident to SLED, as this man is already on administrative leave for shooting a man over a purported misdemeanor, and the DV charges have since dropped. That is how this badge gone bad landed on our radar. Photographed here, mind you, in a nice, wonderful promo ad where TJ Joy is expressing his thanks and his support for his wonderful manpower, mind you. So there has been no charges yet relating to the OIS where he appears to have violated his own department's policy. But even in the deputy that we quoted out that way, he said something to the effect of course, a Florence County deputy would land a domestic violence charge within months of killing a man over an alleged misdemeanor. So again, I mean, I refer to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are just the fellas that I printed off in the 20 minutes leading up to this call here. I mean, I think gone are the days of saying we've got a bad orchard. I mean, a bad apple here. I mean, this is a bad orchard, y'all. And maybe it's time for some deforestation.
Man, what a Andy. We started with the chainsaw on the tree, man. You took us on a roller coaster, man. By the way, just want to say, no outlet has been more supportive of the core function of government that is law enforcement than FITSNews. We've always argued that they should be funded commensurate with that responsibility. We've always argued that they should be equipped to do their job. But folks, they've got to be held to a higher standard. And in case you hadn't noticed, Andy Fancher is holding to them to that standard on a daily basis. Andy, amazing work on all those stories. And also, I want to single Andy out with Dylan's absence this week. Andy's been called upon on several occasions, starting last week, flowing all through this week on short notice to do a ton of stuff. Andy, you are a grinder, man. I love having somebody that works as hard as you, that is as hyper-focused. Jen, why don't you say who's more ADD and potentially autism challenged, me or Andy? Who do you think?
I think you, well, you're both there, but I think Andy this week kind of, but we had him, from Myrtle Beach down to Hampton County. So he was a good sport. He never stopped working, not once. Not, I mean, even in the car, I'm driving and he's cranking away on his stories.
Well, it's super important, Andy, because I mean these are positions of public trust, and that means the public needs to trust them.
And one of the interviews we did in Hampton was with Hampton County Sheriff Anthony Russell, who is a great guy and is, we do like to feature both ends of the spectrum.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah,
the,
I think
the new sheriff down there in
Oh,
Hampton, blew the whistle on some bad behavior down there. So absolutely, props to
And
him.
I just wanted to tag to what y'all are both saying here. With just about every badge gone bad that we report on, we do give their employers, whether it be the chiefs or the sheriffs, ample time to respond to this malfeasance and negligence. And I can't think of a single time that these commanding officers have actually taken that opportunity to speak on it. So yes, props to Sheriff Bubba for calling out the flagrant corruption in that area. I only wish that sheriffs who perhaps oversee men like this hold them as accountable as Sheriff Bubba appears to be. So,
and
and
just
again,
to
to
be
what-
clear, his name is Anthony Russell, but he goes by Bubba.
yeah, I should have made that clear. He's a hell of a character. But yes, Will, in the process of reporting on these badges gone bad, the only way this is possible, and I want to preface this, the only way that we can report on badges gone bad is with good badges, is with men and women who say no to that blue wall of silence and are attempting to knock it down, who are attempting to bring light to, again, those flagrant laws that are being violated on body-worn cameras. So I will give props to the men and women who reach out to me on a weekly basis to bring attention to this blatant corruption in the Palmetto State.
You just said a key term there, body-worn cameras. South Carolina, of course, to great fanfare, signed a body-worn camera law when former Governor Nikki Haley was in office. There was one problem, though, Andy. They forgot to make it mandatory. The body-worn camera law is totally at the discretion of the law enforcement agency, so clearly that ain't going to cut it. We've got to have full transparency, and so when FITSNews FOIAs, we know they're going to deny it. We know they have a statutory basis for denying it, but we always ask for that footage because it is public record.
Regardless.
Absolutely, it is public record. It deserves to be made public. But
especially if we're financing those fancy Axon body-worn cameras too. So we fund for the cameras that are for our protection, but we don't have access to the footage. Tell me where that makes sense.
Well, unless you're in Hampton County where the sheriff can't get financing for body-worn
it's
cameras.
unbelievable. Well, and that brings me, Jen, as we close out the show, that brings me to the part where we talk about what's coming. And you and Andy just alluded to it in your interview with Sheriff Anthony Bubba Russell down there in Hampton. You guys were down in Hampton County this week filming some interviews regarding what's happening in Hampton County. Again, that Hampton County just absolutely dragged through the mud during the Murdaugh saga. So many folks, the glare of the international spotlight. And since then, allegations of financial impropriety on the part of the government, which have endangered those core law enforcement functions down there. Jen, you've been all over that. I'm really looking forward to seeing the interviews that you guys did in Hampton. Also, as I mentioned, obviously we will be covering the big hearing involving one of the persons of interest in the Stephen Smith investigation coming up. Also, a ton of cases coming up this fall. We've got the retrial of Michael Colucci. That's coming up. We've got the Rose Petal murder trial in Greenville. Just a ton of big stories that FITSNews has covered. And I want you guys to know, as I mentioned earlier in talking about that Stephen Smith case, you can count on us to pursue these stories no matter where they go. This is not a team sport. This is a search for the truth. And here at FITSNews, that is what we will continue to be devoted to. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Jen. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in for this special edition of the Month in Review.